Welcome to the session on global knowledge, decolonization, and preservation in culture and arts education. This is a virtual side event held in conjunction with the 2024 UNESCO World Conference on Culture and Arts Education. My name is Tina Frühauf, and I'm hosting this event together with my colleagues on behalf of Répertoire International de Littérature Musicale, better known by its acronym RILM, an organization engaged in the dissemination of global writings on music. We will present 4 short papers, all rooted in the understanding that globality is an important pillar in education. After the last paper, you will have the opportunity to engage in a discussion. Please put your questions into the chat or the Q&A. I would like to now open the session with a presentation on global knowledge and global literacy in culture and arts education. To begin, what is global knowledge? Since the 1990s, globalization has become a common word in the modern lexicon. Today, it implies many things: cultural, economic, and together, a strong connectivity among nations. Indeed, long gone are the days when what takes place in one country is unknown in the rest of the world. For instance, citizens around the world witness wars almost concurrently with the people who suffer them. In many ways, globalization is made possible and has been accelerated by rapid developments in computer technology in the last century. This has affected global knowledge and education too. The concept of global knowledge is tied to globalization, and yet it is distinct. It can be understood as knowledge that moves between and beyond widely dispersed territories and individuals and institutions across the world, or as the global placement of knowledge. Another way to capture it is as knowledge that is far beyond local and indigenous contexts. As such, it is cross-cultural and measurably useful for a broad group of people or situations. Most importantly, it should be characterized by diversity in sources. In sum, global knowledge has to transpire cultural and geographic boundaries. Eric Cheng, professor at the Education University of Hong Kong, has proposed a knowledge framework comprising 5 knowledge domains. The first, technical and economic. The second, human and social. The third, political. The fourth, cultural. And the fifth, educational. I'd like to argue that these domains should not be seen as separate pillars, but as a network relevant to culture and arts education. Further, I'd like to propose that these domains should be approached from the perspective of global knowledge. Why, you might wonder, should global knowledge be important? Allow me to respond by applying Cheng's knowledge domains to culture and arts education on a global scale. I'd like to return now to those 5 pillars. First, in the technical and economic knowledge domain, global knowledge needs to be created for positive international cooperation and competition. Global knowledge in this domain includes resource exchange and sharing of information among nations. No doubt, this is also relevant for culture and arts education. The human and social knowledge domain includes global knowledge for a global village and the development of international friendship and exchange, social cooperation across cultures, and achieving the ideal of eliminating national, regional, racial, and gender biases, no doubt a significant attitude for culture and arts education. The political knowledge domain means global knowledge for contributions to international understanding, common interests, and coalition that might ultimately lead to the elimination of international conflicts and world peace. Culture and arts specifically can make a difference here. Think, for example, of the work that the West Eastern Divan Orchestra is doing. For culture and arts education, the cultural knowledge domain is most pertinent, as it refers to the global knowledge necessary for the appreciation of cultural diversity and the acceptance of other cultures. Global knowledge in this domain hopefully will lead to the development of a global culture with values and goals that are embraced by all. Lastly, the educational knowledge domain includes global knowledge for the development of globalized education, which fosters international education exchange and cooperation. One aspect that all 5 domains have in common, and that in my view are crucial in creating a general overarching foundation for global knowledge in culture and arts education, is information literacy. In conjunction with this, I would like to advocate here for bibliodiversity. Scholarship, for example, is said to be a global public good insofar as increasing access to knowledge globally does not diminish the value of knowledge to anyone else. It should be of high quality and trustworthy, generating broad public support for the expertise and knowledge that it reflects. It has become clear in recent years how far we are from this ideal, and that this is a problem for higher education. To be sure, there are also known drawbacks in globalized education that need to be managed by both teachers and students. In the first place, competencies need to be developed in scrutinizing information and internalizing authentic materials into useful knowledge. Competencies also need to be developed in the application, adaptation, and transfer of knowledge to different cultural contexts. Second, the global should not discount the local. Students need to learn about their own indigenous culture and use it as a basis for developing an appreciation of other cultures. Third, the value of the individual might be diminished within the wave of globalization in educational contexts. Culture and arts education has the power to transcend the tension between globalization and individualization. And fourth, teachers need to help students to distinguish between the electronic virtual world, which to a great extent facilitates global knowledge, and the prevalent realities. Whether in the context of culture and arts education or within other areas, I would like to stretch that knowledge, whether scholarly or other, should be shared as a kind of global public good. This is all the more important as the era of globalization has been taking new turns in the last years, particularly given the splits that have taken place with China and Russia. Even without the emerging national security and other regulatory limits to globalization, there are several different geographies for the communication of knowledge. For example, the US, Latin America, Europe, and India, as well as China. Within each geography, there is a discrete package of policies that incentivizes and shapes scholarly and other communication. Open access has reduced the barriers to distributing written knowledge across geographies, but it has had less of an impact in integrating knowledge from across geographies into a single, global, and trustworthy record. These issues aside, global knowledge and literacy can be an initial step towards appreciating cultural diversity, recognizing that scopes, methodologies, and modes of expression are different. By aiming towards global knowledge and literacy, teachers and students lay the groundwork for cultural acceptance across countries and regions. Ultimately, if as teachers and students we transcend boundaries, we can strive for complete knowledge, not bounded by language, country, or other parameters. In closing, I would like to advocate for the transfer of knowledge and the fostering of information literacy that honors the local and reaches for the global. In approaches to teaching and learning about culture and the arts, global knowledge as an important pillar that can add and should be creatively embraced and integrated into the UNESCO Framework for Culture and Arts Education Draft 1, advanced for the Abu Dhabi conference that is just upcoming. Global knowledge can concretize the guiding principles of this Draft 1 and be added as a component to its objectives, which perhaps is implied, but it needs to be stressed. To bolster this plea, my colleagues will further elaborate and concretize. I'm now turning over to Zdravko Blažeković, RILM's executive editor, who will present a paper on the subject of social responsibility, language, and communication in global music, arts, education.
Following the general thoughts about global knowledge by my colleague Tina Frühauf, I would like to make the case for a specific tool that is critically important in accessing global music knowledge, and which has been since its beginnings designed fully in accord with the UNESCO ideals of promoting equality and inclusion among the scholar, in this case, music scholars. That tool is RILM Abstracts of Music Literature, produced since 1967 by the Répertoire International de Littérature Musicale, better known by its acronym RILM. RILM is a non-for-profit organization based in New York City that has developed into one of the world's largest non-academic, self-sustained institutions of music documentation. Its mission is documenting and disseminating music research worldwide by creating and maintaining digital collections and advanced tools for music research. RILM Abstracts is a comprehensive global annotated bibliography reporting on writings concerning all types and traditions of music and dance, published in any language and in any medium. RILM was founded in the mid-1960s by the American musicologist Barry S. Brook, who was one time also president of UNESCO's International Music Council. His vision for music bibliography was to provide a solution for better communication among music scholars worldwide. Brook's global thinking was in many ways atypical at the time for the American intellectual networks that frequently considered knowledge created in its universities and research laboratories supreme to scholarly developments in other parts of the world, and more in line with the mission of the United Nations and UNESCO, which considers achievements of all countries on the equal footing. Since its beginnings, RILM remained an international collaboration modeled on UNESCO, where individual countries organized their own national committees contributing bibliographic records on music to the central database in New York City. This model provided the intellectual framework for a multilateral collaboration grounded in the equality and inclusion of all contributing nations, regardless of their political systems, ideologies, and geographies, or whether the music scholarship is the result of a long or a short tradition. The world of music scholarship is divided today in broad linguistic megaregions of English, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, and Arab languages, which are punctuated by a myriad of languages with smaller number of speakers. Of course, there are scholars who are continuously crossing linguistic boundaries, but for many, scholarly communication is limited to their own linguistic bubble. And yet, Anglo-American bibliographic networks are perceived as arbiters of global scholarly relevance, even though they often ignore developments current in other linguistic regions. It is not rare to encounter large scholarly studies by American scholars that have enclosed bibliographies without one reference in language other than English. The leading music reference works created in Europe and North America, which often claim the ultimate authority in the discipline, may be international in scope, but favoring Anglo-American and Western scholarly publications fall short of being fully global. Computer algorithms and search engines are often not trained to provide broad access to knowledge created across all linguistic regions without prejudice. In a world that is considered global and thus connected, indexes measuring impact factors of academic publication often champion publication in the English language, ignoring ideals of building bridges between all nations and leaving those who publish in other languages outside of the main scholarly flow. Although we may be accustomed to communicating globally in English, English is not always the language of global musicology, which is described by past president of the International Musicological Society, Daniel Choa, as inclusive, embracing the musicology of every tribe, tongue, and nation in all its multifaceted brilliance across the globe, and methodology indiscriminate. If we want to develop global music research today, as we do, research of our computer searches, results of our computer searches should reflect the totality of the global music ecology that cross all linguistic and geographic borders. And that has always been RILM's ideal. Even users who do not know how to search in a particular language, RILM's indexing and system of subject terms and equivalences will provide them with the full landscape of writings on any desired topic in any particular language. RILM's understanding of its social responsibility is reflected in its indexing practices, guided by the internationally endorsed standards rather than recommendations by US organizations. For example, institutions are always represented in RILM abstracts with their own original language names and appropriate even bilingually. Records representing publications in non-Roman writing systems are rendered bilingually with all fields both in the original script and in English. Bilingually are also represented the geographic locations cohabited by different ethnic populations speaking different languages. Finally, RILM editors continuously refine music terminology to find terms preferred by people whose cultural heritage this terminology reflects. Even if you write in the English language, it is important to be mindful of how we use and spell professional terms, names of institutions, geographic locations, or ethnic terms reflecting specific cultural traditions. These are only some of RILM's practices that reflect social sensitivities and respect for different linguistic traditions and heritages of people coming from all corners of the world. The landscape of global music research has shifted during the past decades away from the Eurocentric focus, and music research has significantly expanded across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. As a global database, it has been both expected and necessary for RILM abstracts to fully embrace scholarship in all these countries. So let me give two examples here. RILM abstract presently receives from its Chinese contributors about 600 records per month, making China the largest national contributor to the database. Over the last 20 years, we added to the database about 85,000 bibliographic records for Chinese publications. The average music scholar in the West will probably not be adequately informed about the nature of current music scholarship in China, but consulting RILM abstracts will easily demonstrate the richness of the scholarly literature produced there. Even without knowledge of Chinese language, it will be easy to understand how the interest and methodologies in music research have changed there over the last 60 years, and that scholars there today share the same interest and methods of research as their counterparts in the West. India is the second example. India is a country whose music scholarship is particularly difficult to follow, since many publications are printed by small publishers and distributed only locally. Self-publishing is more frequent there than in any other country of the world. Even large libraries do not acquire the broad spectrum of current publications of music and do not have complete runs of important music periodicals. All the publications are available only in rare copies owned by private collectors. Some books are distributed as Xerox copies of original manuscripts. Even though such publications are particularly significant for local culture, they circulate only in limited networks of musicians and students gathered around important gurus. These specific situations make the role of RILM Abstract, that is trying to build bibliographic network of these records, more important than in many other countries. Global musicology has no center of gravity. Each of us has a different perspective on music, telling a different story, establishing a different standard, creating a different canon. The totality of global musicologies is ungraspable because it is infinite. And in RILM Abstracts, all these local and global networks come together, providing a unified meeting space promoting equality and inclusion. And access to boundless literature allows today students to become involved in the study of any topic they can imagine. Students in Asia today have the previously impossible opportunity not only to perform European music, but also to study it with unprecedented access to scholarly literature. Such access has never been available before when scholarship was appearing in printed books and periodicals. The opposite is also true. European and North American scholars can now have access to indigenous literature about Asian and South American or African tradition that was unavailable in earlier times. Research methods around the world are different, and it is wrong to judge the scholarship of other countries using the criteria developed by and for the Anglo-American academic tradition. Scholars influenced by their own indigenous system of knowledge will create research that may follow different methods from what we may consider rigorous in Western academia. As modern academics involved in guiding students to their future careers, and as intellectuals responsible for influencing music scholarship in general, today we need to have a source of information concerning all scholarly currents occurring anywhere in the world. Global musicology is not just a matter of influencing the other, but allowing the other to change the way we understand ourselves. One of the ways to do that is to find published scholarship by the other. And RILM Abstracts will be a reliable source to help with all these needs. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. In the next 10 minutes, I would like to share, building upon the framework introduced by my colleague Zdravko Blažeković, a case study presenting efforts to document, collect, and make accessible written sources on Iraqi music in the form of bibliographies and annotated bibliographies. I will share an overview of the processes involved in identifying repositories of written knowledge, the challenges encountered, and the promises held by such effort within an ecosystem of musical knowledge production interrupted by war and displacement. In April 2003, the National Museum of Iraq, the Iraqi National Library and Archive, also known as INLA, and other governmental institutions holding materials with cultural heritage significance were subject to widespread looting and partial destruction. In the aftermath, it is estimated that the Iraqi National Library and Archive, INLA, serving as the primary repository of printed materials in the country, suffered a loss of 25% of its print material, including books, rare editions, newspapers, as well as a significant portion of its archival materials. The former director of INLA, Dr. Saad Iskandar, speaking at the Internet Librarian International Conference in 2014, described the library as a cemetery of books. The period surrounding and following the invasion was characterized by widespread damage to cultural heritage sites and the partial destruction of some libraries and archives belonging to cultural, academic, and religious institutions. In the realm of musical heritage, the International Center for the Study of Traditional Music, the only official music documentation center in the country, holding a wealth of significant and rare recorded and print archival materials, suffered partial destruction. Located at the headquarters of the Ministry of Culture in the central Baghdad, the central manuscript collection and a portion of its archival recorded material were ravaged by fire in April 2003. Libraries and cultural institutions often become deliberate targets during times of war. In post-war period, physical and digital libraries and webs of information infrastructure should be recognized as sanctuaries for preserving written sources of knowledge. Beyond the information infrastructure of cultural heritage, holders of musical knowledge, master musicians, students, performers, and educators were forced to either leave the country or retreat from performing spaces due to associated risks and volatile security situation. Many music scenes in the country were interrupted, and others moved and started forming in other safer geographies outside of the country. Chain of musical knowledge transmission were also interrupted due to the displacement and movements of master musicians, educators, and students, and due to the interruption of the work of the two music degree granting institutions in the country. Even before the 2003-led invasion, decades of war and economic instability diverted public and private funds from music research and left much of the music infrastructure crumbling. In this context, we understand written materials on Iraqi music as part of the country's musical heritage. Books, periodicals, journal articles, newsletters, essays, master theses, symposium, and conference proceedings, dictionaries, encyclopedias, are publications delivering research and documentation on various musical traditions, biographies and autobiographies of musicians, news about music scenes, performance programs, and more. Written sources in time of crisis should be approached as holders of knowledge with a significant documentary role of musical heritage, scenes, and infrastructure that suffer fragmentation or partial destruction. In the context of the destruction and loss of INLA and other institutional libraries holdings, and the sale of many private libraries and the flea book markets across the country, and the ongoing challenges in building information infrastructures, interventions to document and index written sources carry crucial importance. Of equal importance is tracking written sources that are self-published and that circulate outside of institutional libraries. The intervention of RILM in this case is twofold. First, identifying written sources in public libraries, private libraries, and the flea book markets across the country's urban centers. Second, producing bibliographies of written sources and making them accessible through integration within the global libraries network. Like many countries with local publication hubs, and akin to the case of India, RILM seeks to monitor publication from local publishing houses, as well as those that are self-published and circulate locally, often among amateurs and students of various music genres. At INLA, with an available online catalog not integrated in WordCat, books and articles from all periodicals are identified by RILM staff. In other institutions, catalogs exist only in prints or are available on local servers. At the International Center for Traditional Music, for example, RILM staff documented bibliographic information of the library's book holding. Beyond institutional libraries, RILM seek to document bibliographic information and create annotations for rare books and other written sources kept in private libraries of music scholars and connoisseurs inside Iraq and among the country's diasporas. With 40 years, RILM staff also built on the only bibliography of written sources of Iraqi music that was published in 1981 by the Ministry of Culture and Information. With 40 years separating that effort and our, we approach music bibliographies with the understanding of local webs of knowledge production, with the awareness of their significance in preserving Iraqi musical heritage within a post-war context, and with the conviction in their scholarly and cultural contribution to the diversity of perspective on music research and education on a global stage. By understanding these local webs of written knowledge production and tracing their circulations, RILM team of scholars and editors bring a model of intervention to the global knowledge paradigm by preserving local writings of music, thereby expanding access to obscure written sources and eliminating barriers for learners, educators, and researchers alike. These efforts contribute to the first strategic goal of the UNESCO Framework for the Culture and Arts Education concerning access, inclusion, and equity. Events of extreme crisis, wars, natural catastrophes, and mass displacement compel us to think critically of urgent ways to ensure the preservation of written sources of knowledge for current and future educators and learners. The loss of one written source of knowledge in any part of the world is a loss to all humanity, and the recovery of any written source of knowledge in any part of the world is a gain to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Farah. The last speaker is MU Qian, an editor at RILM, who will bolster decolonization as one of UNESCO's strategic goals with his paper, Decolonizing Music Research and Education, the Case of Uygur Music Literature.
Hi, hello. Following my colleague Farah, I'm going to present another case study, that of the Uyghur music literature. Let me show my PowerPoint. Okay. The research on Uyghur music is predominantly published in the Chinese language in China by both Uyghur and Han Chinese scholars. Uyghur language publications are few and often get little attention. This situation has deeply influenced the state of Uyghur music research, because language is not only a medium of writing, but also a system of thinking that shapes research. This influence has also made its way into international music literature. For example, in Du Yaxiong's article on the music of Northwestern China for the Garland Encyclopedia of World Music, translated into English by Valerie Sampson, he classifies Uyghur folk music based on Chinese rather than Uyghur concepts, a common practice of Chinese musicologists. He divides Uyghur folk songs into tuge, which means unaccompanied songs, and xianghe or processed songs, and xianghe songs further into changdiao, which means long melody songs with free rhythm, and duandiao, which means short melody songs with a quick tempo. These are all Chinese terms which are not used by Uyghurs themselves. Do divide Uyghur folk music according to whether they are performed as single songs or taoqu, which means song cycles. In addition, Du argues that the most important characteristic of Uyghur traditional music is the use of huoyin or moving tones, which are applied not only to music in the Persian Arabic system, but also occasionally to pieces in the Chinese system. Here, Du is apparently applying the division of the world's music into the Hellenic, Chinese, and Persian Arabic systems, which was proposed by Wang Guangqi, a Chinese musicologist who studied comparative musicology with Hornbostel in Berlin. For Du, Uyghur music is influenced by both the Chinese music system, characterized by pentatonic scales, and the Persian Arabic music system, characterized by microtones. How do Uyghur people see the relationship between their music and Chinese or Middle Eastern music? Du didn't ask this question and certainly didn't answer it. More problematic is Du's discussion of Uyghur religious music, in which he talks about the azan, or call to prayer, and Quranic recitation as song forms, and shamanic song and dance as part of the Sufi al-Qasama ritual. For Uyghur people, azan and Quranic recitation are not songs, a term reserved for secular vocal forms, while the Bakshi healing ritual and the Sufi al-Qasama are two different ceremonies that shouldn't be conflated. When talking about Uyghur Mukam, Du uses the term Makam, which is a genre of Arabic or Uzbek Tajik music. Mukam is conceptually similar to Makam, but it's not part of the Makam tradition. Like the way Du treated Uyghur music as subordinate to Chinese and Persian Arabic music systems, rather than a system of its own. Here, Du seems to see Uyghur Mukam as part of Makam. These problems can be explained by the references, which include no Uyghur language sources. This is a typical issue in Chinese minority music research, which is primarily done by Han Chinese musicologists in the Chinese language without conceptualization from the research subject's perspective. And sometimes the concepts used by Han Chinese musicologists in turn influence minority people themselves. For example, based on his research on the Galao, or big song of the Kam or Dong people in the 1950s, Chinese musicologist Xiao Jiaju divided Kam songs into 大歌 or big songs and 小歌 or small songs, a theory that was adopted in the Encyclopedia of China and Dictionary of Chinese Music, and accepted by some Kam people. However, since the 1980s, some Kam scholars, such as Zhang Yong, argued against using the term small song because there is no such a concept among the Kam people. Some Han Chinese musicologists do try to use Uyghur terms in their research. For example, Zhou Ji described different forms of zikr in Uyghur terms, but unfortunately only in Chinese characters, which renders it difficult to translate them back into Uyghur or link them to Sufi practices in other parts of the world. This is another issue in Uyghur music research. In Chinese publications, very often only the Chinese transliteration are provided without the original spelling, either in the Uyghur or Latin script. In addition, Chinese transliterations are often not standardized, especially with personal names. For example, Uyghur singer Pasha Ishan's name is different in these two articles published in the same journal, People's Music. And sometimes only the first names of Uyghur musicians are given in Chinese language publications without mentioning their last names, which makes it difficult to verify them. To decolonize research on Uyghur music means letting Uyghur people tell their thoughts about their own music. In reality, Uyghur language music literature is often hard to access. For example, although Uyghur language journals and books are being published in China, none of them can be found in CNKI, China's largest academic database. Decolonization is inherently linked to activism, and decolonizing research on Uyghur music is part of our work at RILM, a database that aims to include the music scholarship of all countries and in all languages. Unfortunately, this is one of the only Uyghur language items we have in RILM right now, which is a CD recording of Uyghur singer Mosajan Rozi. Right now, we don't have many article or book in the Uyghur language in our database, but this situation must change. We have to make Uyghur music literature accessible to researchers from around the world, including China. Recently, we entered the first Uyghur language abstract into our database, thanks to Rachel Harris for providing a Uyghur language abstract for her article on mesh rap published in Ethnomusicology. We will add Uyghur language abstracts to more publications on Uyghur music, and we have invited a Uyghur PhD student to work with us to access Uyghur language journal articles, books, dissertations by Uyghur authors in both Uyghur and Chinese languages, and locally produced Uyghur music recordings. We will provide Uyghur and English abstracts as well as indexes for them. And I hope our work will play a positive role in decolonizing research on Uyghur music. Uyghur music literature is by no means the only case in which decolonization is needed to provide a more equal, just, and humanistic education. Decolonizing knowledge is part of the everyday work of RILM, and we would like to take this chance to suggest that UNESCO take decolonization into account when developing a framework for culture and arts education, so that every culture can continue to develop in the era of globalization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, MU Qian. At this point, I'd like to extend a thank you to all our panelists and invite attendees to ask any questions that they might have using the Q&A feature. While people maybe are writing, I'd like to just open up with one that can be placed kind of generally to all of the panelists. I was wondering if anyone would like to speak on some strategies that can be deployed when people are confronting texts in a language that they do not know or understand.
Maybe I can take this question. As I was saying that RILM database is access to literature of the world. We index literature in any language. And our database also has almost 300 periodicals with full text. And when you have full text in a digital form, you can take it and put it in Google Translate or other services, translated services, and read it in your own language. So this is where RILM comes in a focus, that it guides you to the literature, and you find the literature even if you don't know the language, and then you can put it into AI machine and translate it. The problem comes when the sources are not digitized, and that when sources are not available, like what Farah was explaining about Iraq, or these small publishers in India. That is difficult situation, and that's why more we digitize, more we access we have to the knowledge.
Thank you. Just waiting to see if anyone else would has any questions for our panelists. If not, I'll ask another kind of general question. I guess the question I'm kind of wondering is, how can just anybody access this global knowledge? What are some steps that people can take?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. And I think that when we think of accessing knowledge, as accessing writings, we speak of very different scenarios depending on where we are in the world. The situation for somebody in Australia will be significantly different than for somebody in China, Russia, parts of Europe, and the US. We can go from continent to continent and we find different scenarios. So there is not a one-catch-all answer to this. Thinking about open access, of course, is something that in the US and in other parts of the world is quite significant at the moment. There are a lot of discussion about that, and I think that a lot of literature is openly accessible, but the more significant question is, what if not? How do people actually gain, for example, access to curated databases like RILM? And I think that there are a lot of programs that libraries can apply for, and that they should if they're in the Global South. The Stavros Niarchos Foundation, the Belinda Gates Foundation provide access. I'm aware that EBSCO is part of a program for underserved libraries around the world and is offering certain databases. And RILM is offering an extended access to libraries that are kind of handpicked to make sure that they actually have at least access for an extended period of time. And I think that libraries should really think, especially when they're in the Global South, how they can source funding from the various funders that are supportive of making resources widely accessible regardless of where one is. So I want to push you a little bit against the sentiment that one needs to have solid funding in order to have access. Librarians are constantly faced with issues of funding and cuts of funds. But I think that the true issue lies really in parts of these the world where funding is absolutely minimal, and where thus knowledge is very minimal because the libraries are just very underserved. And I think that the idea of looking into partnerships with organizations and developing new funding models by way of foundations is probably a very crucial step forward to remedy certain situations in libraries around the world.
Thank you. You actually might be another good person to answer a question that I was wondering as well, is does RILM offer any support or consultation services for people who would be interested in using it, whether that be music librarians, individuals, anyone who would be interested in kind of confronting this knowledge?
Yeah, in terms of consultation services, I would need to have a specification, you know, what kind of consultation services. We started, of course, a program that very closely interlinks with generating knowledge. That's a teaching program. We have been holding tutorials for many, many, many years, but now we are bringing this to the next level, simply because students really are not necessarily often exposed to how to source knowledge properly, how to use curated databases. And I think that even in the music sector, the creative sector, something very basic like how do you source proper knowledge and how do you deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion when you do this is, I think, very, very useful. RILM is always open to liaise with any library or anybody who has questions. So anybody is free to consult with us on any issue they like. We are constantly looking for this dialogue. We are available at many conferences in order to kind of feel the pulse of time, but also to have dialogues with the different populations that we are interlinked with, which are librarians, which are teachers, which are students, which are performers, and unaffiliated researchers.
Thanks so much. I just want to convey one thing that we have as a not so much a question, but a note of thanks. And we thank Professor Baldassare for his remark. He just wanted to thank us. So I just thought I'd convey that. Beyond that, just a quick question for MU Qian. Again, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you could talk at all about any difficulties or challenges you confront in indexing when it comes to using Uyghur terms. Yeah, I'll leave it open to that. Maybe you have some words you could say.
Yeah, of course. I think one of the issues is that there are several different romanization systems for the Uyghur language. And I know at least 3 systems. So some people use this one, some people use other systems. For RILM, right now I'm using the system developed by the Xinjiang University, which is, I think, the most popular one used by Uyghurs in China. But because Uyghur language is not a national language, so I don't think there is a ISO system for the Uyghur language. I think this is beyond indexing, but to be more inclusive of Uyghur music research, I think we would like to, of course, we would like to cover more research by native Uyghur researchers, but sometimes it's not that easy for us to get their research. Ideally, there should be more conferences especially international conferences on Uyghur music held in Xinjiang, but there seems to be some difficulties in doing that. I mean, in the past, there used to be, for example, in the 1990s, I know at least one big international conference on MU Qian was held in Xinjiang, and the proceedings were published after the conference. But in recent years, I don't see many international conferences on Uyghur music held in Xinjiang. I mean, there are conferences held outside of China, but it's difficult for Uyghur researchers to attend them. I hope in the future there will be more opportunities for exchange between Uyghur researchers and the international researchers. And I hope maybe RILM can play a role in doing that.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, I truly hope so too. And so I think it's great that you're giving voice to this and tackling these kind of very difficult questions. Seems like we're getting close to the end, but before we do, I've just a quick question for Farah. I just wonder if you could speak a little bit about any challenges or that you may confront when attempting to identify various Iraqi texts that deal with music, but might not be necessarily found in, let's say, like a music journal or a monograph. I think those are kind of the platforms that we're somewhat accustomed to, but in many places you will find music as a part of kind of a, let's say, cultural complex. So I was wondering if you just talk a little bit about that, kind of identifying and disseminating and facing that challenge.
Thank you for this question. I mean, as mentioned, a researcher, I think, should have an understanding of the, the field that they are specialized in, but the broader fields that they intersect with other fields of knowledge. For example, in the case of music research and writing about Iraqi music, we know that not only music researchers write in this field, but also researchers and scholars and writers that have interest and specialization in history, in heritage studies, in anthropology, and in sociology. So I do look in specific, for example, journals that are of broader topic of interest in cultural heritage, especially in cultural heritage. I know that this is a topic that is very intertwined with music studies in the country. So that's how I go about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Farah. We are all out of time, and I would like to thank all of our panelists and our moderator for an hour of important issues and good questions. I want to thank our attendees for showing your interest in the ideas that we had to share, and I wish the UNESCO a very fruitful conference in Abu Dhabi, and those who are traveling to Abu Dhabi any moment, safe travels and a very successful gathering. A very good Friday to everybody, and a very happy New Year of the Dragon.